History often paints victors in a golden light, their narratives becoming the accepted truth. But what happens when we look closer into the shadows cast by those grand stories? Today, we're journeying back to the turn of the 20th century, to a conflict often overshadowed by grander global events, the Philippine-American War. This wasn't just a simple transfer of colonial power, it was a brutal, complex, and heartbreaking struggle that reveals a dark and often ignored chapter in the histories of both nations. It all started with a promise. In 1898, as the Spanish-American War raged, Filipino revolutionaries, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, saw an opportunity. They had been fighting for independence from Spain for years. When American forces arrived, they saw them as allies, partners in liberation. Aguinaldo and his forces fought alongside the Americans, believing that once Spain was defeated, the Philippines would finally be free. They declared independence on June 12, 1898, establishing the first Philippine Republic, a beacon of hope in Asia. But this hope was tragically short-lived. The Treaty of Paris, signed in December 1898, was a staggering blow. Spain, the defeated colonial power, sold the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. The Filipino people, who had fought and bled for their freedom, were not consulted. They were treated not as partners, but as property. Their newly formed government was ignored, their aspirations for self-determination dismissed. The sense of betrayal was profound. The ally who had promised liberation had become the new colonizer. The stage was set for a devastating conflict. On the night of February 4, 1899, in a tense Manila, a single shot rang out. An American soldier fired upon a Filipino patrol, and the fragile peace shattered. What followed was not a swift campaign, but a grueling war that would last for years. The United States, fresh from its own civil war, now found itself fighting a new kind of battle, a counterinsurgency campaign in unfamiliar tropical terrain against a determined and resilient foe. The initial phase of the war saw conventional battles, where the technologically superior American army consistently overpowered the Filipino forces. But the Filipinos did not surrender. Instead, the war shifted. They melted into the jungles and villages, beginning a protracted guerrilla war. This is where the conflict took its darkest turn. Frustrated by their inability to pin down the elusive Filipino fighters, American military policy grew increasingly harsh. The line between combatant and civilian blurred, with horrific consequences. General Jacob H. Smith's infamous order on the island of Samar stands as a chilling testament to this brutality. Following a surprise attack by Filipino guerrillas that wiped out an American company in the town of Balangiga, Smith ordered his men to turn the island into a howling wilderness. His directive was explicit. "I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better it will please me." He commanded his troops to kill every male over the age of 10. This policy of collective punishment led to the deaths of thousands of innocent civilians, a dark stain on the honor of the American military. This was not an isolated incident. Across the archipelago, tactics like the water cure, a brutal form of waterboarding, were used to extract information. Entire villages were forcibly relocated into reconcentration camps to deny guerrillas food and support. The conditions in these camps were dire. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, and lack of food led to rampant disease and death. The very tactics the U.S. had condemned the Spanish for using in Cuba were now being employed by its own forces. The irony was as bitter as it was tragic. The war's toll was staggering. While around 4,200 American soldiers lost their lives, the cost for the Filipino people was catastrophic. Historians estimate that anywhere from 200,000 to over 1 million Filipinos perished. The vast majority of these were civilians, victims not just of direct violence, but of the famine and disease that followed the destruction of their homes, farms, and way of life. It was a demographic disaster that would haunt the Philippines for generations. The narrative back in the United States was heavily managed. Pro-war newspapers portrayed the Filipinos as uncivilized and incapable of self-government, justifying the colonial project under the guise of benevolent assimilation. President McKinley famously claimed the mission was to uplift and civilize and Christianize the Filipinos. Yet this rhetoric masked the brutal reality on the ground and ignored the fact that the majority of Filipinos were already Catholic. But not all Americans were silent. The American Anti-Imperialist League, which included prominent figures like Mark Twain and Andrew Carnegie, vehemently opposed the war. They argued that it betrayed the very principles of freedom and self-determination upon which the United States was founded. Mark Twain, in his scathing satire, wrote about the hypocrisy of a republic behaving like an empire, imposing its will on a people yearning for freedom. Their voices, though powerful, were ultimately drowned out by the tide of nationalistic fervor and imperial ambition. The war officially ended in 1902 after the capture of Emilio Aguinaldo, though resistance continued in parts of the country for another decade. The Philippines would remain an American colony until after World War II in 1946. The legacy of this conflict is complex and deeply ingrained in the relationship between the two nations. For the Philippines, it represents a stolen dream of independence and a period of immense suffering. For the United States, it is a troubling chapter that challenges its identity as a champion of liberty. Why is it so important to remember this forgotten war? Because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, ambition, and the human cost of empire. It reminds us that history is never simple, and the line between liberator and oppressor can be perilously thin. By understanding the brutality and betrayal of this conflict, we gain a more honest perspective on the past and a deeper appreciation for the enduring struggle for true freedom and justice around the world. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a difficult but necessary piece of history. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more content that uncovers the hidden corners of our past. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious.